Rumbles in the legislature come down to the wire as controversial reforms reach the final stage of approval. 2 firefighters are dead, and people are asking what can be done to prevent more deaths. North Korea's latest satellite dreams go up in smoke as one of its rockets explodes in midair. Plus, street vendors bid plastic bags goodbye as Taiwan makes an eco-friendly push. Hello and welcome. This is TaiwanPlus News. I'm Leslie Liao. Taiwan's lawmakers just passed controversial reform bills to expand legislative power, a move that has sparked widespread protests inside and outside the chamber. There have been multiple prolonged sessions over the issue. And for the latest developments, we are joined now by Joyce Zhen at the legislature in Taipei. Joyce, now that the bill has passed, what are the next steps?
Another long day here at the legislature, Leslie, but moments ago, lawmakers have just passed 3 items in the KMT and TPP's proposal to expand legislative power. Now, this includes the contested items to criminalize contempt of legislature and mandating a presidential address in the legislature, and the rest now are still going through the 3rd and final reading. Now, coming into today, the bills were actually pretty much all set. The 2nd reading last week was really the last chance to change any of the bill's substance. On the table now are only minor details like changes in punctuation. But again, we're seeing very strong protests from the ruling DPP's lawmakers. We've seen them shout things, even throw things at the speaker. That's the KMT's Han Kuo-yu. We've also seen thousands of the DPP's supporters outside here in the legislature maintaining their stance that these bills pose a threat to Taiwan's democracy. Now, the KMT and TPP, the parties pushing for these bills, which also include more oversight of the president, say that these bills are all in the hopes of increasing transparency. They say that the ability to hold government officials accountable, including the president, is important in a democracy. Now, earlier, a KMT lawmaker even called out the newly inaugurated president, Lai Ching-te, directly, saying that his lack of communication is noted thus far with opposition parties.
赖总统，你从当选到现在，跟所有的在野党完全没有任何的接触、沟通、询问，这不是一个国家元首该有的格局跟气度，应该尽速的召开国事会议。
Now, although these bills are in the final stages, there's still a lack of consensus here between the camps, Leslie.
So what options are left for those who oppose the bills?
Well, the cabinet can ask lawmakers to reconsider. This would force another round of votes in the legislature to approve these bills again. But given that the KMT and TPP hold a majority, this is unlikely to produce a different outcome. Now, the DPP has said that they will take it to the Constitutional Court and challenge it there. A big part of their anger towards these bills is the way the KMT and TPP have pushed it forward. DPP lawmakers say that it was brought to the legislative floor directly for a floor vote without the normal clause-by-clause discussion. Now, it's worth noting here that in Taiwan, the president does not have veto power, and so really the only arena to settle this dispute would be in court.
Still more to come following the passage of the bills, I'm sure. Thank you, Joyce. That was our reporter Joyce Zhen live for us at Taiwan's legislature here in the capital. Outside the legislature, thousands have showed up in protest of the bills. In demonstrations, organizers are now calling the bluebird movement. Irene Lin was there while they were waiting for the bills to pass.
Well, inside the legislature, voting continues over controversial reforms to expand lawmakers' oversight powers. Here on the streets outside, thousands of people are gathering, with more expected to protest later. Many people come from across the country. They say they're worried that the bills aren't clear and that they have not been properly debated. They're accusing the opposition of not giving enough room for dissent and discussion.
我认为他们现在通过的法案会影响我们台湾的五权分立的民主。那它破坏所有的权力平衡之后，就变成行政也要听立法院的。那是不是立法院自己就变成国民大法官？
We think democracy is more about discussion, is more about compromising and negotiation instead of just using majority to pass laws that is favoring the majority parties.
And it's not just here in Taipei. Organizers say protests are happening across 15 cities and counties in what they're calling the Bluebird movement, a play on the name of the road where protests began a couple of weeks ago. It's the fourth day of demonstrations against the reforms. Almost exactly 10 years ago, Taiwanese youth started another mass political demonstration known as the Sunflower Movement against a Taiwan-China trade pact proposed by the then-ruling Kuomintang. Back then, the protesters also called the legislative process a black box. People here say these protests have a similar feel to the Sunflower Movement.
只要是没有正当的民主程序的话，我们人民或是青年学生都会主动的站出来，这并不是政党动员的。
我想这边应该大家不一定都是未必都是支持民进党的，对，但是守护台湾民主的这一点，是大家都共同的不变的。
Many people here today say they're not necessarily supporters of any specific parties. They say protecting democracy is a duty. Now, the Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP, holds the presidency but has a minority in the legislature. The DPP has called the bills unconstitutional and has vowed to seek a court interpretation, but people here are waiting for the result and if politicians hear the demands of those outside. Howard Zhang and Irene Lin for TaiwanPlus.
To find out more about the controversial bills and the protests they've sparked, Rick Glauert spoke with Brian Hioe, the editor of New Blue magazine, earlier today.
So you've been quite vocal about these reforms. Could you tell us what the objections are?
So there are two levels. One is the means by which they were passed, in that this is seen as violating the norms of transparency the legislature should adhere to. So the phrasing is often black box, that there's not a clear review process for experts to weigh in, and it was just rushed through. There's also discourse then that the DPP, while it's a minority, doesn't mean that its rights should be trampled over entirely, because it's not such a large majority that the KMT and TPP have over it, but also then one needs to take into account opposing views. And then apart from that is the question of the bills themselves, that they are seen as allowing for prosecutorial powers that then legislators could weaponize, use to target individuals they politically don't like, or even to target, for example, companies and force them to reveal their trade secrets. And there are a number of legislators that they themselves have business interests. And so it's feared this will be used for political corruption.
The main opposition parties are saying that these reforms will bring greater checks and balances for Taiwan's legislature. So aren't they a good thing?
The way it's framed in this way, it's packaged then as providing oversight and allow for greater checks and balances. But the criticism is that this, in fact, gives the legislature the power that is currently reserved for the executive branch of government. And in some way, this seems to be accommodation to the fact that the KMT is having difficulty winning presidential elections. And so instead of trying to craft a compelling political platform to win the next election, you seek to arrogate some of the powers currently for the executive to the legislative branch of government. And in this way, then, the question is, would this also interfere with judiciary powers? Because if then legislators have prosecutorial powers, then that seems to blur the lines between the different branches of government.
It's highly likely that all of these measures will go through, as the main opposition parties do have a majority in the legislature. You've been at the protest. Where do you see this protest movement going if the bills do go through?
So that's a very good question, because the DPP could seek a constitutional interpretation. The executive branch could raise issues with the bill, and then that might lead to some further space for discussion, or rather mobilizing protests against the bill from the perspective of civil society groups. There's possibly that Lai, as president, could veto the bill, but there's not really a veto power in Taiwanese politics. He could do that, but then just goes back to the legislature within about 2 weeks. And so it is a question of what happens. And if the KMT presses through then this amplifies anger regarding them. It's unknown if civil society groups will try to escalate after that, because the focus now is on not escalating, that this is peaceful and that process should be adhered to. And civil society groups have maintained that rhetoric so far. But it's to be seen if people are angry enough to take actions or take matters into their own hands, such as occurred with the Sunfire movement 10 years ago. And I think that's one of the bigger questions with the protests, because they have grown to such a size that has not been seen in 10 years. But would there be an attempt to, for example, carry out a form of direct action? And the organizers have emphasized there's no plans like that currently, but who knows what would happen in the future.
That was Brian Hioe, the editor of New Blue magazine, speaking to our reporter Rick Lauert. Taiwan is calling for its inclusion in the global health system as the World Health Assembly kicks off in Geneva. Taiwan has been denied observer status at the forum for the past 8 years due to pressure from China, which says it has the right to represent Taiwanese people at UN events. Taiwanese officials hosted a press conference on Monday to speak up for the country's right to participate.
我们许许多多的台湾的专业医事专业人士都担任国际医事组织的理事长、副理事长非常重要的职务，所以这就是一个很重要的一个资源。
The death of 2 firefighters in the northern city of Hsinchu has put renewed focus on firefighter safety in Taiwan. As John Van Triest reports, firefighters themselves have different views on whether more can be done to make an already dangerous profession less risky.
A memorial to firefighters Li Yongzhen, age 39, and Zhou Lixin, age 34, both killed in the line of duty Sunday. They were found overcome by smoke in the stairwell of a high-rise apartment block in the northern city of Hsinchu. They'd gone back in to rescue residents trapped in a fire, but ran out of oxygen. Firefighters' oxygen tanks make a warning noise when they run low. Firefighters also carry an alarm that goes off automatically if they stop moving for too long, helping their crewmates find them. There are even firefighters posted outside burning buildings, ready to go in should firefighters inside get into trouble. But none of these precautions saved these young firefighters. And they aren't alone. It's the second time in 5 years Taiwanese firefighters have died after running out of air. Some firefighters say there's no way to make rules about oxygen use, as everyone's lungs and hearts are different. Each firefighter needs to get a sense of how quickly they use up their air, something they develop through training.
我们平常有做空气呼吸器的训练，你自己的体能跟你自己的耗气量，你自己能把握的话，你进火场你安全就可以自己去掌控。
But others say the problem is that there are many other standards that are lacking, or that can be totally different between different local fire departments. And this, they say, creates unnecessary risks and the chance of fatal miscommunication.
到底要怎么样去监听无线电？我们该监听的内容，我们该记录下来的内容，怎么样才可以帮助到真的发生状况之后，最快去救援到这个人，或是在管制的时候，我们可以比较早知道这个人发生状况，这样子。对，其实这个都还没有个共通的语言在。
Firefighters groups want the government to be more proactive in forming new policies to prevent unnecessary deaths, setting common standards where they're needed, and reforming policies before more firefighters die in the line of duty. Chris Ma and John Van Triest for TaiwanPlus.
North Korea has failed in its latest satellite launch, but as Hioe reports, countries in the region are more concerned over North Korea's weapons development program.
This is the moment a North Korean rocket explodes in midair. Many people feared that North Korea was testing another missile, but security officials from Japan reported that this was not a weapons test.
朝鮮半島の安定が日中韓3カ国の共通利益である点を改めて確認しました。また、拉致問題の即時解決に向けた両首脳の引き続きの支援を求め、理解を得ました。
Pyongyang put its first spy satellite into orbit in November last year, and the country's leader Kim Jong-un has vowed to add at least 3 more by the end of 2024. This launch was part of these plans and efforts to modernize the North's defense capabilities while keeping an eye on what neighboring countries are up to. But Pyongyang's weapons development and defense program is drawing more alarm from world leaders. South Korea staged military exercises just hours before the launch as a warning, and they say these kinds of actions require a global response.
북한이 오늘 예고한 소위 위성 발사는 명백한 안보리 결의 위반이며 국제사회가 단호하게 대응해 나가야 할 것입니다.
North Korea's satellite launch comes during a trilateral summit between Japan, South Korea, and China. It's a rare meeting between the three countries, as Japan and South Korea have grown closer with the U.S. in recent years. And China, which has friendlier ties with North Korea, is growing more concerned with security on the Korean peninsula. They're calling for a so-called new beginning for security cooperation.
中方一贯致力于维护半岛和平稳定，推动半岛政治解决进程。我们也希望相关方保持克制，防止事态进一步复杂化。
With the U.S., Japan, and South Korea pledging to boost mutual defense ties, North Korea is growing more isolated. But with more satellite launches planned, Pyongyang will have to gauge just how much they can add to its overall security. Andy Shui and Hamiokon for TaiwanPlus.
Stay tuned to TaiwanPlus. Coming up after the break, global leaders condemn Israel as a targeted airstrike kills dozens of people in Rafah.
Welcome back to a new season where we will be interviewing representatives of different countries and chambers of commerce.
This is the bit, and that's the abaya. This is years by years for all the generation.
I'm gonna offer you macaron, Taiwanese and French.
Belize has the second largest barrier reef in the world.
Marine life there is crazy.
We spend like the whole day there, eating, drinking, playing chess.
I don't want to stay here anymore. I want to buy a ticket and fly out. In Taiwan, I discovered not only oolong tea, it's also the first cultural tea house of Taipei.
So there's a lot of interesting things here that helps me get in touch with my heritage and culture.
Here you can make some amazing local food and
all new season. Wow Taiwan. Every Friday, 8:15 p.m. on TaiwanPlus.
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. Israeli leaders are facing global condemnation after an airstrike killed dozens of people in southern Gaza. Harel Hughes has more.
Panic and horror in southern Gaza after an Israeli airstrike hit a camp for displaced Palestinians in the city of Rafah. At least 45 people are dead and hundreds are injured. In the camp, a smoking wreckage. Survivors like the Salman family are searching through their charred belongings, prepared to move again.
هذا النزوح تقريبا رقم 8. طب ايش انا وين اروح؟ فهمني وين اروح؟ وانا كلهم اللي معي اطفال فيش معي حدا يساعدني يقف معي. كلهم اطفال، هاي زي ما انت شايف ها طلع هاي واحد وهي واحد وهي واحد وهناك واحد. طب ايش اعمل انا؟ وين اروح قول لي؟ والامتى هذا الكلام؟ الى امتى؟
The attack on Rafah has prompted a backlash from world leaders.
I condemn this in the stronger terms. It proves that there is no safe place in Gaza. And these attacks take place immediately after the International Court of Justice ordered it to stop all military activities in Gaza.
And across the world, protesters are gathering on the streets.
Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! On ne veut pas être complice de crimes contre l'humanité. Ce qui se passe à Rafah, ce qui se passe dans la bande de Gaza est insoutenable.
Israeli officials say the strike was targeting 2 Hamas commanders in Rafah, using precision-guided warheads. And the civilian deaths were a mistake.
ברפיח כבר פינינו כמיליון תושבים בלתי מעורבים. ולמרות המאמץ העליון שלנו שלא לפגוע בבלתי מעורבים. קרתה לצערנו אמש תקלה טרגית. אנחנו חוקרים את המקרה, אנחנו נסיק את המסקנות, כי זו המדיניות שלנו.
Israeli officials have vowed to continue their attacks on Rafah.
تفرج إن شاء الله حتفرج والله غير الله يفرج عليه.
While for families like the Salmans, their search for somewhere safe may not end anytime soon. Yisan Pan and Harel Hughes for TaiwanPlus.
Cyclone Remal has slammed into India and Bangladesh, killing at least 16 people. Remal made landfall in the coastal regions of Bangladesh on Sunday and hit India just hours later. Severe landslides and floodings devastated low-lying areas. More than 30,000 homes have been destroyed and tens of thousands more damaged. Around 800,000 people were forced to evacuate. Millions of others are without power. Papua New Guinea has called for international assistance after a landslide there buried an estimated 2,000 people. Rosie Greninger reports.
Digging through the rubble with sticks, spades and their bare hands in search for survivors of a landslide in Papua New Guinea's remote highlands. The country's disaster agency estimates more than 2,000 people are buried under meters of earth. But days since the disaster struck, hopes of finding people alive are dwindling.
I think family plumi or staro ground. Now samplai kam dengan minokan kandim and planti. So me papa blon dilan ground mistabe. Osem na yubla kam elbi mia mi hamamat lo yubla. So mia lo kisi mol pemblo plumi stapin jelon ground ya. Mir mistabe.
Aerial footage shows the extent of damage from the landslide that hit Kokalam village in the mountainous Enga province in the early hours of last Friday. Locals say weeks of heavy rain in the area caused a mountain to collapse, burying the whole village, including 150 homes. Aid and assistance have been slow to arrive to the remote location due to treacherous terrain, lack of telecommunications, and tribal warfare, prompting Papua New Guinea's disaster agency to ask for international help.
The biggest difficulty at the moment is that the ground is still unstable. So the PNG Defence Force is actually leading the recovery of survivors to move them to safer ground. But because of the instability, they have to work with great urgency, but also caution. So that's one issue. The other issue is just the accessibility due to the damaged road.
The United Nations has now called a virtual meeting with international governments to organise a relief effort, while countries including Australia and China have already offered assistance, including heavy machinery. But villagers are divided whether it should be allowed to dig up debris and potentially cause more damage to the area and corpses under the rubble. Only 7 bodies have been recovered, and funerals have begun for those few. But as locals here wait for assistance to arrive, they are not only suffering profound grief, but also facing displacement, cut off from food, shelter, water, and other medical necessities. Ryan Wu and Rosie Greninger for TaiwanPlus.
1,800 people in northwestern Indonesia have been evacuated after the volcanic eruption of Mount Ibu. Local authorities took steps to clear a 7-kilometer radius around the active volcano after it started spewing ash 6 kilometers into the air on Monday. The eruption comes during a period of heightened volcanic activity in Indonesia, which has 127 active volcanoes and sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire. Street vendors in Taiwan might soon have to change their ways. A new government trial is cracking down on plastic bag use. And as Chris Gorn reports, it's part of a push to make the country more eco-friendly.
Lively, cheap, and brimming with delicious food, Taiwan is known for its markets. And food bought from one of these vendors almost always comes in its own plastic bag. But that may change starting in July, as the government rolls out a trial to phase out plastic bags at markets. Some people here say they're ready for the change.
如果这是一个趋势，我们就变成势必要走向这样。如果是这样的政策，就要自己带啊。
Taiwan has been cutting down on plastic bags over the years, but the Environment Ministry says the country still uses about 10 billion bags each year. And annual plastic bag sales by weight has actually gone up by more than 40%. This level of plastic use leads to heaps of waste, which often washes up on beaches or breaks down into microplastics, which end up in our rivers and oceans, in our food, and in our bodies. The government began restricting plastic bag use several years ago. In most grocery stores, customers have to pay for plastic bags or bring their own reusable ones. But small market vendors have mostly been excluded from these rules. Under the new policy, vendors will be asked not to automatically hand out bags, while a full ban is planned for the future.
并无要求购用塑胶袋要付费才能取得，而是用鼓励的方式来改变民众的生活习惯。
Taipei's Ningxia night market is the first target for the plan. Plastic utensils have already been banned here, and vendors seem willing to help where they can.
袋子真的是用太多了，其实就是你买一个，然后你去别摊的话，然后就是一起放在一个就好。
消费者只要带提锅或者环保杯来，我们帮你打9折、打8折。那消费者也乐意来带着环保杯一起来跟我们做公益。
Taiwan is trying to meet international standards on waste reduction. While there's still a long way to go, these policies aim to preserve Taiwan's lively night market environment without harming the country's natural one. Alex Chun and Chris Gorin for TaiwanPlus.
Now, we'd like to thank you for tuning in to TaiwanPlus News. Remember to check us out on social media or on our website if you'd like more. Before we go, check out this rare sighting of an endangered whale shark in the waters off Taiwan's Penghu Islands. I'm Leslie Liao. Take care and see you next time.